The midday sun on Lake Harmony was usually a balm, a warm golden blanket over the quiet, manicured streets of my subdivision. Today, it felt like a spotlight, harsh and unforgiving, highlighting the small, aggressive woman who was currently vibrating with indignation on my driveway. But let's back up a little because you won't believe how this all started. I was just enjoying a rare Sunday off, the smell of freshly cut grass mixing pleasantly with the faint, sweet scent of the neighbor's jasmine bush, planning to finally tackle that mountain of paperwork in my home office. Before we dive into the moment the cops rolled up, comment which country you're watching from and if you've ever had a run-in with an HOA tyrant, because trust me, this one takes the prize. The day had started perfectly. I'd slept late, made a strong cup of coffee, and was sitting on my porch enjoying the absolute stillness. My house, a modest but well-kept rancher, sat on a corner lot just outside the main gate of the highly exclusive, and notoriously snobby, Lakeview Estates HOA. My mailbox, clearly marked with my street address outside their jurisdiction, had been my fortress against their peculiar brand of suburban tyranny for 2 quiet years. Then I heard the sound, a high-pitched, insistent tap-tap-tap on my porch railing. It was the kind of sound that immediately grated on your nerves like a hummingbird with a vendetta against aluminum. I looked up to see Mrs. Penelope Simmons, a woman whose name alone conjured images of tightly cinched pearl necklaces and aggressively perfect landscaping, standing 3 feet from my property line, clutching a laminated clipboard like a weapon. Penelope, or HOA Karen as the few brave neighborhood kids secretly called her, was the current self-appointed queen of Lakeview Estates, and she was already looking at me with the kind of disapproval usually reserved for spilled red wine on a white carpet. Her face was set in that specific, rigid mask of suburban authority, every line etched by years of scrutinizing lawn heights and enforcing passive-aggressive bylaws. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice even and polite, opting for the strategy of treating her like a slightly annoying relative I was forced to tolerate. "Can I help you, Mrs. Simmons? Though I think you're actually standing on my property now, not the HOA's common area." I gestured vaguely toward the property marker, which was clearly visible, embedded in the grass just beyond the edge of her expensive, slightly too perfect petunia bed. She didn't move, her eyes doing a slow, critical scan of my yard, lingering for an unnecessarily long moment on the small, almost invisible patch of clover near my oak tree. "My street address," she corrected, her voice thin and sharp, "is 4701 Lakeview Circle. Your mailbox currently shares the same cluster as ours, and that suggests you are attempting to appropriate Lakeview resources." She took a deep breath, puffing out her chest, which was adorned with a brightly colored, almost offensively large HOA committee pin. "And more importantly, your vehicle, the black SUV, is parked in a manner that obstructs the aesthetic flow of our entrance corridor." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. The black SUV was parked on my driveway, fully contained within the concrete boundaries. "Mrs. Simmons, with all due respect, I live at 1500 Meadowbrook Lane. I am not in the Lakeview Estates HOA. My address is not yours, and my driveway is definitely not your entrance corridor." I stood up slowly, trying to project a sense of calm dismissal that I absolutely did not feel internally. "I pay no dues to you, and I follow no regulations of yours. You have zero authority here." The mention of zero authority seemed to hit a nerve, igniting the spark of righteous fury she'd been holding back. Her jaw dropped slightly, then snapped shut with a click I could practically hear. The clipboard in her hand trembled. "I find that highly improbable," she stated, her voice rising in pitch. "Everyone on this side of the main road is subject to the covenant and bylaws. Your property looks like a part of Lakeview. It is simply unacceptable to enjoy the visual benefits of our perfectly maintained community without contributing your fair share." She then leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially, but the effect was more hissing than intimate. "I will give you one chance, young man. Sign this preliminary agreement to submit to a property inspection, pay the outstanding aesthetic contribution fee for the past year, and we can move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. Otherwise, I will be forced to take official action." I simply stared at her for a moment, the absurdity of the situation momentarily paralyzing me. This was beyond the pale even for an HOA. This wasn't about a gnome or a paint color. This was a blatant and aggressive attempt at annexation. The sun was getting hotter, and I could feel the heat radiating off the concrete, matching the rising temperature of my own irritation. "Mrs. Simmons," I said, crossing my arms, making it clear that the discussion was over, "I am not signing anything. I do not owe you a penny. I suggest you consult your legal counsel, because the only official action that will be taken today is me calling the non-emergency line to report you for trespassing and harassment if you don't immediately leave my property." That was the line. Her face went from rigid disapproval to a mottled, furious red. Her eyes narrowed, and she actually took a small, dramatic step back, clutching her phone to her chest. Harassment, you are attempting to defraud a community. You are the very definition of a free rider and I will not stand for it. You know what, fine, you want to play hardball, I'm calling the police right now. They'll make you show proof of residency, and when they see you're refusing to join a clearly defined community, they'll issue you a citation for willful negligence of community standards. She was already tapping furiously on her phone, her voice now loud enough to carry across the street. Yes, officer, I need the police immediately at the entrance to Lakeview Estates. I have a hostile individual refusing to vacate and threatening a community official. I feel physically threatened, and he is refusing to cooperate with a legitimate property dispute. I watched, frozen for a moment by the sheer audacity as she spoke into the phone, her eyes locked on mine in a triumphant, venomous glare before she abruptly ended the call and stood there, arms crossed, the victor in a battle that hadn't even started. The sudden, jarring sound of her high-pitched, deliberately performative distress call echoed sharply in the quiet Sunday morning air, instantly drawing attention. My neighbor from across the street, an older gentleman named Mr. Davies who usually kept to himself, poked his head cautiously out from behind his garage door. His expression a mixture of confusion and immediate concern. He'd seen the usual HOA antics, but this level of hysteria was new and I could feel his eyes, and potentially the eyes of other unseen neighbors, fixed on the unfolding drama. I felt a surge of adrenaline not from fear but from a profound sense of disbelief and a growing, cold anger. This woman was seriously weaponizing the police over a fictional property line and an imaginary fee. I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to say anything else, knowing that every word would only be twisted and used against me in her narrative. Instead, I stood my ground, my posture firm, hands visible at my sides. The silence between us now that her manufactured crisis call was complete was deafening, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant, low hum of traffic. She stood there, basking in her perceived victory, her posture radiating self-importance, her eyes darting toward the main road, clearly anticipating the arrival of her summoned backup. "You've made a huge mistake, Mrs. Simmons," I finally said, my voice low and steady, stripped of all politeness. "This isn't a community standards dispute. This is a false police report, and that has serious consequences. You are playing a very dangerous game over a petty territorial issue that doesn't even involve my house." I watched her, waiting for a flicker of doubt, a sign that she recognized the gravity of her action, but there was nothing. Only that smug, unshakable confidence that comes from years of being coddled by power and privilege within her little HOA kingdom. She actually scoffed, a quick, dismissive sound. "You think you can intimidate me? I have the full authority of the Lakeview Estates bylaws behind me, and as for a false report, officer, you are the one who is attempting to circumvent legal obligations. I simply reported a trespasser who became aggressive when challenged, and look, here they come now." She pointed dramatically toward the main road just as the distinct, unmistakable sound of sirens, still distant but rapidly approaching, cut through the peace. Two squad cars, not just one, turned onto the street, their blue and red lights flashing in a chaotic, dizzying dance off the polished paint of Mrs. Simmons' sedan and the immaculate windows of the nearby homes. The situation had just gone from absurd to gravely serious. The patrol cars pulled up swiftly, one parking directly in front of my driveway, the other angled slightly behind Mrs. Simmons. Two officers, a tall, serious-looking male officer and a younger female officer, emerged, their movements professional and measured. The tall officer, the one in charge, approached first, his expression neutral but his eyes already sweeping the scene, assessing the two figures, the hysterical woman and the calm man. I watched as Mrs. Simmons immediately stepped forward, playing the victim perfectly, practically throwing herself at the officer. "Officer, thank you for coming. This man here, he's been hostile and abusive. He's refusing to comply with our community's clearly established property assessment protocols and has refused to show any proof that he isn't squatting or operating outside the law. He threatened me when I presented him with the official notice." She spoke in a breathless rush, pointing an accusing, trembling finger directly at me, the laminated clipboard shaking violently in her other hand. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. I almost had to admire the commitment to the lie. The officer listened patiently, his gaze flickering between her and me. The officer held up a calm, steady hand to pause her torrent of accusations. "Ma'am, please step back and allow me to assess the situation." "Sir," he turned to me, his voice calm and authoritative, "can you please tell me your side of the story, and do you have any identification on you?" This was the moment of decision. I could simply show him my driver's license, explain the property lines, and let the situation de-escalate with a stern warning to Mrs. Simmons. But the cold, hard fury I felt over her blatant abuse of authority and the waste of police resources pushed me down a different path. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat to the peace and to the principle of not being subject to rules you don't agree to. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through the remaining tension, calm but carrying a weight of authority that surprised even me. Before I answer any questions, I need to make one thing absolutely clear. This woman called you here on a false premise. I live here and I am not a member of her HOA. She has been on my private property attempting to extort a non-existent fee from me. I paused, letting the words sink in before continuing, my eyes holding his steady gaze. And yes, I do have identification. But I'm going to show you something else first because I think it will clear up the entire matter instantly, and Mrs. Simmons is about to learn exactly why you don't frivolously call the police on your neighbors. I reached slowly, deliberately into my inner jacket pocket, the movement slow and noticeable, giving the two officers plenty of time to see exactly what I was doing. Mrs. Simmons, watching my hand, her face still a mask of indignation, let out a short, triumphant laugh, clearly assuming I was reaching for some fraudulent piece of paper or a flimsy excuse. The sound of Penelope Simmons's smug, short laugh was the final, satisfying trigger. It was a sound of complete certainty, the absolute belief that the system, her system of rules and social power, was about to validate her entirely. The tall officer watched my hand intently, his own hand subtly moving closer to his sidearm, a necessary precaution in any tense situation where a person is reaching into a concealed pocket. The air itself felt tight, charged with the sudden, dramatic shift in focus from the petty HOA dispute to whatever was coming next. Mr. Davies, the elderly neighbor, had actually stepped out of his garage completely, now a full, riveted witness to the drama unfolding on my corner lot. My fingers closed around the familiar, cool, smooth surface I was reaching for. I drew it out slowly, deliberately, not with a flourish, but with the measured, steady movement of someone who has absolute confidence in the immediate effect of their next action. It wasn't a piece of paper, and it certainly wasn't an excuse. It was a slim, leather-bound wallet, slightly worn at the edges from years of being carried, and held within it, under a clear plastic shield, was the one thing that could not be argued with, dismissed, or twisted by an HOA Karen, my official identification. I flipped the wallet open, holding it in front of me first for the benefit of the two uniformed officers. The tall officer's neutral expression vanished, instantly replaced by one of professional recognition and a clear, immediate understanding. He took a short, respectful step back. The younger female officer mirrored his reaction, her posture relaxing slightly but her eyes remaining focused on the wallet's contents. They had seen this specific ID countless times, and they knew exactly what it meant. My eyes, however, were fixed not on the officers but on Penelope Simmons. Her smug smile had already begun to freeze the moment she saw the specific metallic sheen of the emblem. I slowly, almost theatrically, tilted the wallet just enough for her to get a clear view of the photograph and the bold, official block letters underneath. What she saw wasn't a driver's license for a homeowner at 1500 Meadowbrook Lane. What she saw was a photo of me looking decidedly less relaxed than I did now, and the title, U.S. Marshal District Office, Sector 4. The transition on her face was immediate, staggering, and utterly glorious. It was a rapid-fire sequence of emotions, triumph dissolving into confusion, then instantly snapping into paralyzing horror, followed by absolute stupefaction. Her jaw actually went slack, and the laminated clipboard which she'd clung to like a life raft slipped from her numb fingers and clattered loudly onto the concrete. The sound was sharp and final. She froze in place, her eyes wide, locked on the small, unassuming badge and the official seal, the full realization of what she had just done. Falsely reported and harassed a federal law enforcement officer, washing over her like an icy wave. "Officer," I said, turning back to the tall patrolman, my voice now carrying the low, non-negotiable tone of my professional authority, a tone that completely cut through the suburban drama. "My name is my name, and as you can see, I am a federal marshal. I live here legally at this address, which is not in Lakeview Estates. I was on my private property, where this woman, Mrs. Penelope Simmons, trespassed and repeatedly threatened me with legal action unless I paid her a fictitious fee and agreed to an illegal search." I gestured to the fallen clipboard. She then proceeded to make a false report of a hostile individual refusing to vacate, a report that resulted in 2 city patrol cars being unnecessarily dispatched to my home on a Sunday afternoon, diverting resources from actual emergencies. The patrol officer nodded curtly, his demeanor now entirely focused and deferential. "Understood, Marshal, we appreciate the clarification." He turned slowly to Mrs. Simmons, whose face was now the color of old parchment. "Ma'am, you are no longer the complainant in this matter. You called in an official disturbance under false pretenses, claiming a federal officer threatened you on his own private property. That is a serious offense." Penelope Simmons found her voice a small, pathetic squeak. But the rules, the visual conformity," she stammered, gesturing weakly toward the invisible line. "Your rules do not supersede federal law, ma'am. the officer stated flatly, his patience clearly gone. You have committed harassment, trespassing, and the misuse of emergency services. We have multiple witnesses. He nodded toward Mr. Davies, who promptly gave a firm, supportive nod back. We can either issue you a citation for the misuse of 911 services, which is a substantial fine, and accompany you while you apologize and leave the marshal's property, or we can take you down to the precinct for a formal report on the false filing and harassment. Penelope Simmons's entire body seemed to deflate. The image of the HOA queen, the suburban tyrant, shattered on the concrete of my driveway. Her power had evaporated. There was no defiance left, only the stark, cold reality of accountability. She looked utterly defeated, humiliated in front of her neighbor and the very police force she had tried to weaponize. She didn't even try to argue. I am sorry, she mumbled, her voice barely audible, avoiding my gaze completely. I apologize, Marshal, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to check the public property records, Mrs. Simmons. You just assumed your little kingdom extended everywhere, I stated, my tone final. Now, gather your things and don't ever set foot on my property again. Consider this a professional warning. The two patrol officers escorted a thoroughly chastened, utterly silent Penelope back to her own property, retrieving her dropped clipboard and hustling her into her car before driving off, leaving the street silent once more. Justice, I thought, sometimes comes in a leather-bound booklet with a heavy metal shield. The peace was restored, and the lesson that authority must be earned, not simply asserted, was delivered with definitive clarity.